It's justice. I'll tell you what, it doesn't happen all the time, but occasionally, it actually happens more often than you think, but occasionally I run into something that I hate to use that word game changer just because it's cliche, and it's usually in hyperbole. This was originally meant to be a spy bait design that Will Carpenter worked on, and I kind of shake and bake that I helped. Not much, but the end product of the spy bait model design actually ended up making a better glide bait. Not saying the spy bait's bad, but this glide bait's pretty cool in the fact that, I mean, it looks nondescript. There's nothing really particularly special about it just by looking at it, and I could be guilty of that, but you don't see too many with that, like kind of a profile, almost like a Jake, but no lip. But what's interesting is, aside from the weight placement inside, when I first started fishing it one day, I just noticed that it responded so well to so little energy. Swings out, but the cool thing is, I've got a lot of weight in there right now, so let me see if you can see it, the way it rocks. On the way down, and it gives you some control like that. Now that's the cool thing, you can change the weights out on this however you want. So like, for example, it's pretty heavy weight, it's like a 3/4 ounce. That pulls it down. If you guys aren't familiar with this, it's a fairly universal weighting system people use now. I forget the threading, but it's kind of a thing a lot of lure builders are doing to add modular weights in. There's kind of a uniform size to the threading, and then they produce these little weights you can buy. H2O Tackle sells some. You can get them a lot of different places. But then basically you can just take different weights and thread them into the bait, which I'm not going to do all the way because I just took it out for a reason. But, I mean, it's that kind of idea. So, like, you have all different kinds of weights, and it's really cool. Some of the better lure makers like Will or Roger Waters, they build their baits with a default mode in mind, but then they take everything else into consideration about how the weights can allow it to be a different tool. You can fish a different depth, allow you to fish a different speed. A lot of Roger Waters baits have a default slow rise or a fast rise, and then you can add the weight into it. Not only is the placement of the weight, where you put it within the body, because often they have 2 or 3 spots that each do something a little bit differently. You can change the way you fish with it with speed, but it also changes the action and the depth application a little bit more. But this glider, I don't know if you can see that in particular. Now, if I make a short cast, like most gliders, you give it a little bit of leash to work with, and you can get it to swing out pretty good. But the neatest thing about this bait, the thing that like really makes it stick out in my mind, it's very functional like that. You can see like as the default, it's just got a slow sink, and it rocks. It's under the weight of the hooks. By the way, this is called the quiet pill. Google it. But that's the default mode. So like if I just wanted to fish shallow, I've got a glider that I can basically just throw up in the 2 feet of water. It still has a pretty nice inherent sink rate to it, but it's not super fast. But then, as easy as that, now I've got a bait that rocks a little bit faster, sinks a lot faster, and it still retains that glide out. You don't have to give it much energy either. Here's one of the cool things you can do with it. So we had that top side like that. And most guys that fish glider baits, they kind of get, I think one of the biggest things people can make the mistake of with any glide bait is get this rhythm. Because with, some baits, it's like you've got a topwater bait yet, and I'm not a big believer in there's like a specific cadence you have to work this with. But, especially with gliders, it seems like people walk the dogs and crankbaits, they get into a pattern of motion. They don't really explore it, let alone slow it down. So this glider was specifically adapted with this in mind. There's only 2 gliders I've ever used that do this exceptionally well. And this is one of them, and the other one's Sean Chapin's Tail Gunner. And it's a different body style. It's like a shad-bodied one. It doesn't swing out quite as much, but it dances nicely. But this thing, I screwed the weight in, and now I'm fishing this down. you know, 15, 16 feet. And you can feel it pop out on the glide. You don't want to hit it too hard. You don't want to get into a rhythm. You don't want to just go tap, tap, tap. That's what most people do with glide baits. They find the rhythm and then they go tap, tap, tap. Fishing this bait specifically will teach you to not do that. Because if you do that, you're just going to come right back up to the surface. It's meant to sink and fall. Even if you work it at a regular rhythm, eventually the resistance of you just pulling on it, bringing it up, is going to bring it up closer. But what you want to do is just tap it. And it's still gliding out down there. The way you can tell that it's gliding out down there is like sometimes you'll do this and it'll foul over on itself. Meaning that the line and the angle and the way the bait went, it literally turned to the side so quickly it grabbed the line. You can see we're not fishing this fast at all. I'm giving it a moment to fall. And it still rocks out, it still has control. I mean, literally, I'm almost vertical jigging this glider right now. You would not believe how many fish, especially when it gets cold, wintertime, they're inactive, you want to do that. This is kind of a new phenomenon for this bait. Like I said, you didn't have a lot of glide baits you could really do that with a lot. Oh, see, that's how close I got to the bottom. Snag some stuff. But here, we'll make a cast like this. But it gives you that opportunity, if you'll take it, that you don't really lose the control of this bait in particular in fishing on the fall. Like, watch the line. You literally can see the line shake as it rocks down. Saying, don't. That's the bait doing that. And when it has that rocking motion like that, that gives it a level of control because it's always adapting to the resistance as it pivots from side to side. Helps it fall. It's not just a seductive action for the bait itself. Like, that's a cool little trigger, like especially when you're letting it fall. Just that doot, 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 doot. It's like a little bit of just kind of inherent animation. But the other cool thing about that too is when it's doing that, you know that it's literally equalizing itself as it falls. It's staying steady. It's staying level. It's not tumbling. It's not. And I'm just letting this thing sink and sink. Now occasionally I get it close to the boat like that. Popped it up hard a couple times, see if anybody was behind it. I mean, you can see that time it came in clean. It's almost entirely underneath the boat. And every time I pull it, it turns to the side. I hit a little bit too hard right there. And that's what I'm doing down 16, 17, 18, 20 feet deep. So that's cool. And yeah, that's a showcase for this bait, absolutely. But like this bait in particular, when you have a bait like this, it really allows you to do some stuff that you haven't been able to do before. With control. With that kind of a presentation. A lot of people will just fish through an area like, you know, deeper water, colder weather, they'll just jig it, which is fine. Or they'll throw rubber down to it, which is fine. But rubber doesn't have that hang that turns side to side. And it's been a very difficult task in the past to find gliders that people have considered to fish down that deep. And that's what's really cool about Will's stuff is this glider in particular, when we adapted it off what we saw the positivities of the spy bait, which really wasn't much, basically take the props off. We always had this in mind as a specialty tool. He even makes another drop belly shad glider that's designed specifically for fishing deeper open water suspended fish, which is something that, I mean, the glide bait genre really hasn't considered as like part of their MO. It's really not something most people consider. I think that's a big reason too. You run into a lot of people that like, oh, they never use gliders. Or I don't like gliders. And then you go to a place you go to places where predominantly people fish rivers, and that's like probably a good 60% of their arsenal. Because most gliders aren't designed to be fished down deep, but they usually serve a really good function in current when you're fishing eddies and stuff. Like there's a whole West Virginia glider culture. It's where some of the best ones come from. But people in open water, they fish big lakes and stuff, they don't see as much of a need for it because they're fishing so many things out deeper. They're fishing so many things, suspended water or suspended fish, open water. And to a lot of them, the glider is just like, well, that's not what that does. Well, the cool thing is too, I mean, even in that event, even the gliders, if I took the shallow setting on this, I know lots of guys that come from that, like West Virginia School of Fishing. And like Tim Woodyard, the guy that makes those great gliders we use. Like he throws that, and that's made to be fished in shallow water. He'll throw that over open water in some of the reservoirs and catch fish, suspended over 30 feet of water. But even still, his baits do stuff in shallow water that it's remarkable. But they're not the best tool for fishing deep, maybe over deep. You take something like this. I mean, you can tell I'm not going like this. I'm not, oh, how do you work this bait? I don't know. Work the bait. That's like the most asked question of anybody in my boat is like, how do you work this bait? And when I tell them, it's like, well, I'll tell you what, like take it in the water. And I mean, yeah, I'll give them some basic information, but I don't like to do that because then people don't explore their own creativity. And they kind of stifle themselves, kind of get locked into it. I mean, I'm like, look, take a bait, put it in the water, dick around with it at the boat for about 5 casts, see what it does. If you can't figure out, like that's how I analyze a bait more than anything. I'll just take it through the water, check it, and then you can see all these applications for this. We're going to try that one more time though, but you can even see the tooth marks. This bait's not that old. She had a nice one yesterday. She got off. We're going to try to get her. But the coolest thing about that fish is what we're trying to do right now. Is I didn't even know I had that fish down there the other day. I didn't even know I had it hooked because I had thought, like I said earlier, the bait will turn on itself sometimes and foul. And you'll feel that little bit of resistance when it pulls the whole body sideways. And I was just dancing the bait down, 15, 18 feet. And I went to tap it, and I felt the resistance. It felt like the bait was fouled. And then when I pulled on it hard, I got a head shake, and the fish had just barely come up and nipped it while I was doing that little dance. So, and there was no specific rhythm to that either. That's the big thing, is like, don't try to find these static concepts like, well, how do you work this bait? What's the rhythm? What's the speed? Like, explore the bait. Like here I've added weight to this so I can fish it deep. But I know so many guys that literally they'll take a bait like that. We'll talk about this some other baits in a little bit because it's interesting to play around with Roger's stuff too. See how the weights play out because it's always very well thought out with his stuff. But like they'll change the weight of something but not change any way that they're presenting it. So like if they want to fish deeper, they'll buy a heavier bait, but then they don't change their speed and they don't change the way they fish it. So it's like they're set on this autopilot control of like, well, I'm supposed to only fish this way. Or like with a bulldog or something, it's like they'll change the weight of it, it'll change the size, but then they don't really play around with anything else because they're just accustomed to the fact that this is the way you work this. Rip, rip, rip. Well, if you keep the same motion, but you want to do something different, you have to change something with, the bait, not how you're doing it. But like just taking your time with this thing. And this is just a great place to demonstrate because the water's still. But I mean, look, most guys, when they fish a glider, they will have tapped the rod 5 to 8 times. And then in the time that I've yet to touch the bait, because I'm letting it fall down, I'm watching the line. And you can just imagine, it's like almost like the spinnerbait stuff we do in the summer and we've talked about and filmed, where it's kind of a mix between jigging and casting. And I don't like to talk about those lines because as soon as you talk about trolling, people go to trolling. There's certain things trolling are jigging. And I'm like, there's all this stuff in between. You move the variable, you move the labels. So like, if you really want to classify this, like, well, what am I doing? I'm throwing a bait out that I can literally jig laterally away from the boat. I don't have to have it underneath the boat because if I tap it like this, it'll still go up and down, but also go side to side. And if you're jigging directly underneath the boat, well, this is probably the only bait you can make go side to side underneath the boat, to be honest. You can vertical jig this thing too pretty well. Because, I mean, what are you going to do? Like, whoop, try to jerk it, it doesn't work. Yeah, see, occasionally you'll get leaves down there. Just letting it sink down. But even still, I was still getting motion out of it. But yeah, that's like I said, guys. I don't always get excited. Oh, I do get always excited about stuff, but I don't just get excited about stuff for no reason. Like it's amazing how you get little things buried in the rough. But sometimes, you know, what did Bob Ross call them? Happy accidents. Like this is kind of one of those. But while we were trying to design the physics for the spy bait, it ended up being a better glide bait. And I've used a lot of stuff. I've used a lot of different styles. I don't want this to be just one of those like, well, I'm endorsing this because, you know, I know the guy or I helped part of it or whatever. Like, I've never seen glide bait do this that well. Like, you can't see it. I'm literally watching it turn side to side as I lightly tap it and fall down out of sight. And yeah, there are some you can fish to this degree, but like, they don't rock like that. You don't have the weight you can add in like that. It's a very special tool in your arsenal. And another thing that I will address concerning gliders is a lot of guys would probably look at this and immediately say, well, it needs a squirrely tail. I don't think it needs a squirrely tail. I think people are hung up on squirrely tails. Squirrely tails are cool, and I think they can definitely draw attention. But I'll be honest, I don't think that if it inhibits what the bait can do, don't mess with it. Now, a lot of them, they're designed, like Tim's stuff. The tail version, he's got a straight version, he's got a tail version. The tail version doesn't turn quite as tight because it's got that little rubber rudder in the back. But he's designed the bait to adapt to where it will arc a little bit more, and it's got this really cool curvature when it goes out, but it's not totally mechanical. But, you know, if you put a curly tail on this, it would probably destroy a lot of the inherent action it goes. Like, it would kill the curve a little bit. So, I mean, a lot of people will write off a glider for the most part, like if they don't see that curly tail. Don't worry about it. And I mean, if it's doing stuff like that and swinging out and rocking on the fall, I'm telling you, the last thing you're going to miss is a Gumbo Grub. That's insane. That's the quiet pill. It's a super awesome little specialty tool. It's a good glider just to have, even if you just fish traditional gliders. But being able to do that, and like literally all I have to do is flick of the wrist and I can change the weighting out. I can go from fishing a 20-foot break line with a glider and literally just taking my time to like going to a river and throwing it up in eddies and fishing in 3 feet of water. So like every time you talk to me, I figured out, you know, I like some other bait, but as always, I try to justify why that is. But it's amazing, all the little things you see out there. We got new baits, but you watch some of the new baits and you sometimes wonder, like, well, how did somebody come up with that before? And then it turns out usually they have, or people have considered things and it's not really been discovered yet. This is a product of Roger Waters, H2O Tackle, and I talk about him a lot because he's a flipping genius. And I'm going to just be the first to admit I'm guilty of it. Like, I kind of didn't ever really pay attention to his stuff or take it seriously. For one, I was never really that aware of it because where I'm at, no man's land, you know, a lot of these musky baits exist only in catalog pictures until we see one. When you look at his baits at first, and I mean, they don't look that different. I mean, they don't look that special. In fact, they kind of look cartoony. But it's interesting that like every model of bait I've ever tried with that he's made, it just, I'm like, how do people not use this or know this? This is called a switchback, and this is the straight one. And as far as I know, there's only like 12 blanks left on the plan. We're gonna try to get him to fix that. And by the way, the tail on the back isn't his. That's called Muskie bacon. I throw those on the back of some baits. I actually put it on the back of this bait because this bait can get a little bit out from underneath you. It swings out so much. So check this out. This is the default of this bait. No weight in. It's a floater diver. It's got a really nice swing out roll. Almost you gotta stay on top of it. You can't do it too much, it'll swing out. Once the roll, you could troll it. But I mean, even then, it's just, you barely have to hit it that hard and it'll swing out and roll. Straight crank it. It gets down deep. But then, like so many of Roger's designs, it's got these little things on the bottom. And he puts a lot of thought into these. It's not just, well, I'm just going to, you know, put this in here as an option. Like, he will explore and try these baits a lot. See what the different weights do. So if you see a slot in one of Roger's baits, you know it's not there just for show. Like, he did that for a reason. So we saw the neutral default of that bait. It's like a super, not a super slow rise, but kind of a slow rise. So now I put the weight in the front, right? Now watch the way it sits. It's a very super slow rise. That's a 1/4 ounce weight. And that keeps the head down. So now I'm like, every time I pull it, it wants to dive a little bit. Like I said, the thing's squirrely. You got to watch it. But man, you can work with that. It's a great bait. It's got a lot of jank to it. And that keeps the head down when you put the weight in the front. And I mean, it looks like a giant bait, but the way, something you can notice, if you don't mind, you mind if I grab another bait really quick to use as a juxtaposition? One of Roger's? Watch this. So that bait has that janky action to it, right? And it's got a nice motion if you just crank it and it just tracks straight. But also, you watch the bait in the water, it's not like what you're used to with a lot of crankbaits. You see it like jank out, roll, moves the whole body. Well, let me show you what makes that really quick. Like, notice the subtle changes in details and baits that can make them drastically different. So it's a pretty common, you know, not that by design, but like, it's just kind of the shad base, but this will show you just, or the minnow base, but it'll show you just how much attention to detail a guy like Roger has when it comes to this. So you've got this, and this is the switchback, and we already saw what it does in the water. Look at this. We're going to come back to the switchback, but I just want to explain to you. So most people would think, well, that's lazy. He just took the same shape, general shape as the other one, and put the flip on it. But what do you notice? You notice how on the other bait, the lip follows the curvature of the body. It's not abrupt. Yeah, so watch. Here's a good example, side by side. So essentially the same body design, but you look at this lip, there's a gap between that. So it's not integrated into the arc of the bait. So whenever you pull on it, it's more of a trolling twitch crankbait. It's going to have that resistance. But when you take something like this, and all he did was take basically the same body design, change the weighting, and integrate the lip into it to where there's not that gap. It's not got the resistance. It's literally a foil that makes the bait dive. It's not so much the resistance of the bait itself between the blade and the head that makes it dive. It's that foil. So that's where you get that janky, slow action. And I'll show you like just an example really quick. So that's another one of Roger's baits with a weight in. That's a Cranky Nitro. It's a rather unassuming little crankbait, but man, I'll tell you what, they're all pretty dope. I put the heavyweight in it, so it's a super slow rise. Then you notice that it swings out. It's got a really good action to it. It's very, very erratic, abrupt. Darts out. And like I said, you put the weight in it, make it suspend, just to show you really quick. While we're at it, this is that simple. You put a heavy weight in it. I want to twitch it. If I take it out, super fast rise, twitch is still well. If I'm going to troll it, I'm probably most likely going to troll it without that in it. It's got that nice white action to it. It's got a good wander, good tracks well, but it kind of has a wander to it. But it's still got that resistance. It's like the body and the resistance of the blade is designed as such to where it's shaking the bait. As opposed to this other one, switchback, where that's where we saw that slow motion. And they each have their place, but I mean, fishing stuff like this, especially with the weighting option when it's cold. We're just back here just to demonstrate. You can see the water. It's really still back here. There's not a lot of wind. It's deep enough you can work it. So like that was me illustrating to you how to identify, like you can look at a bait and be like, oh, there was thought into that. This is what it's going to do. It's the kind of thing it's going to do. So watch. We just did that with the weight down on the nose. I'm going to pitch it out really quick. Kind of get a little bit of a runway on it. You can see it still swings a little bit, but it wants to go down because that weight, even that little weight in the front, is wanting to pivot the head default down. Changed it from a slow rise to an almost neutral buoyant with just a little pinch of slow rise. And that keeps that head down. So it's getting down a little bit more with each pump with that head weight. Now watch, this is something that's cool. And I'm hoping this translates to film. If you throw this, you'll see it for sure. But there, that's all I did. That's all I did. I changed this little freaking weight from the head to the midline. And now it doesn't sit as head down. It rides more on the midline. So now the bait's got the same element of weight, but see how it swings out like that? Like I said, so much, in fact, you almost have to keep it under a little bit of a tight leash or just not hit it very hard because it doesn't take that much. You can see that thing get down. I've done 2 pumps that might have cost me half a calorie, and that thing's already out of sight. And it swings out. And you can give it some lift, and then it just sits there and hangs. Now, I took a bait that would slow rise, and I changed the weight from the front to the mid because I wanted it to still suspend, but I wanted it to swing out a little bit more and not quite dive as deep. That's... all baits should be made with such thought. It's like we talk about the quiet pill and the waiting option, being able to fish it down deep. See, there's the bait, it's coming in. Well, look at that. Just with a weight, I made that thing literally, look at that. And I don't like to name names, but I'll tell you the first guy to even tell me about this one was a Rogers, a friend of mine named Nathan Doss. And he wasn't joking when his exact words were, "This is what a Triple D wishes it was." That's what a Triple D wishes it was. Roger, please bring these back. It's the 10-inch switchback. I think I'm going to jointed and the straight. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm probably more fond of the straight just because it has that full body design. There's not a joint that's going to abrupt the action. It's going to glide out. It's literally going to glide out more. It's not, you're not twitching it. It's a crankbait, but you're not twitching it. The other one you twitch with the resistance. Baits like this, it's more of a glide bait kind of feel. Kind of a pull, and then you give it slack. And like I said, the only difference between that, it's not even the body design. It's literally the way the lip is placed. If it's following the curvature of the bait, you get this. You don't get as hard thumping in action, but you get this meandering, rolling, like yaw, glide out thing. Look at that, it's insane. You have to control it. That's an incredible bait, and it's more amazing to me that this bait did not somehow become mainstream. Try to fix that, but I tell you what, it's the first time I saw one of these baits, or got to use maybe about 2 weeks ago, and I immediately fell in love. Like I said, I can't believe that a bait that's that modular, you can change your presentation out with just, the weight. And this thing's already kind of neutrally, or it's not super buoyant. It's not like going to spring back up super fast. So a little weight goes a long way. But with something like that, I think that's really important. Let's say, well, let me show you one more thing you can kind of do with this. This is getting a little bit more into the realm of crazy. Let's take the heaviest weight we have off of this. Now, here's the thing. When you're dealing with crankbaits, you don't really want them to sink most of the time. There's nothing wrong with sinking cranks. But the thing is, most of the way the crankbaits are made, they're designed to kind of work against the force of buoyancy or just neutral buoyancy. If you start making them sink, it's almost like they're not designed to work with that backwards. They're designed to be pulled down, not sink and pulled up. But here we're going to intentionally make it sink. I'm going to put a heavy weight in. So now it's sinking slow. So we were fishing that glide bait a little bit earlier. Now, for all effective purposes, I put that weight in. Forget that it's a crankbait. It's technically a glide bait with a lip now. So it's slow sinks. We have the wobble on it. Not so much a wobble as the other thing, but there's the quiet pill, but it does keep it level. And now I'm just almost pulling it up. I'm giving it pulls, almost like a mix between a glide bait tap and a rubber bait pull. Enough to just pull up, create the resistance of the bait lip against me pulling up, which makes it go like that. So you'll see it when it comes in here. This is a very special bait. This is a very, very special bait. See that? So now, yeah, it's weighted to sink. It's got that slow sink to it. But now especially the thing that's making it turn, because originally when you have a neutrally buoyant or slow sink, the constant force you're going to be fighting against is buoyancy, so rising down. When you've got it like this, where the constant force of the bait is now sinking, and you've got a lip that's designed to pull it, the way you want to fish it is you want to pull up against that. You don't want to try and pull it to the side as much, because you can see it gets a little bit of a glide when you just kind of tap it to the side. If you pull up, that's when it's sinking. The rate of the sink is forcing the bait down. You pull that up and you fight against it, and it pulls up the foil, and instead of just vibrating like that, it makes the bait swing out. Forgive the onomatopoeia and pantomime, but I'm trying to explain this through example. So that's a really interesting thing you can do with that too, which not a lot of crankbaits not only don't have the option to, they wouldn't even think about that. So like I said, when you do that and you change the weight on this bait to that, you make it sink. Now you're not fishing it like a crankbait. You're almost fishing it like a rubber bait, glide bait mix. But that's why I try to even avoid those labels to begin with, because even then I'm trying to make two forms of static working a bait, like well, this is how you work this way, you work that, work to try and explain the way that this bait should illustrate to you itself how you would work it, just by its traits. I mean, look, I'm not jerking it to the side, I'm not tapping it. I'm literally hoisting up on it. And I can feel that down there. When I feel it up, I pull against that lip, that bait sinking, and that cup of that lip being pulled upwards makes the bait throw out. I mean, it's almost a crankbait you can vertical jig. Almost like the quiet pills of glide bait you can vertical jig. And there it is. Slow sink. I've never, honestly, and I threw the little tail on. That's the danger too. You get close to the boat and you're flinging that thing around. It might wrap up on itself, but I threw the little mud. It's called muskie bacon, those little tails. I don't think there's anything magical about the tail. I just wanted to explain. I put it on the back of this because it does give it a little bit more of a rudder and control, because this thing's janky enough as is. You put it on there, gives it a little bit more control on the back end. But you can see too, something like that would kill the action on a lot of baits. With this bait, it essentially complements it. And that kind of goes back to we were talking about the by design of the crankbaits. So like, for instance, you put something like that on a crankbait that's operating off the resistance against the water to activate the diving motion where it's wagging it back and forth because it's hitting that surface and it's going like this. Pivot off, pivot off, pivot off. So then you put something on the back of it like that a lot of times, and what's going to happen is that's going to dampen the motion of this. It's going to fight against it because it's more resistance on the back. So you put this, something like this, especially in a lot of crankbaits that are built like that design, where basically if you took this body and you just made the lip go out like that, it's going to dampen that a little bit, and it's not going to be janky. It's not going to complement what it's supposed to do, which is dart, track, vibrate. But then you take something like this, and you just integrate it into the body of the bait itself, and that's the thing. This doesn't have a paddle tail. This isn't like a curly tail. These are pretty cool, actually. It's not a paddle tail or curly tail. It doesn't have any inherent action itself. It's just there. It just flaps around and kind of sweeps behind on the lateral line, gives them something else to kind of look at the end if they're nipping it. I mean, I'm sure the consideration was, well, we just want to give it a fishtail. That's cool. But the thing about it is I'm thinking about this in aspects of why did I integrate it into this bait? Because it doesn't fight this bait. That thing on the back isn't fighting the vibration of that bait wagging back and forth, but because that bill is incorporated into the arc of the design, that's when it has that kind of motion, where it's not so much tracking like this. It does a little bit, but when you just give it enough energy, it just kind of swings out. It just makes it kind of dive and chart and twist. And so like that's when I figured out, or I thought about that, and I was like, you know, those tails, they work all right on some things, but especially with baits like this, the little snappy twitch bait ones, not so much, but these big glide one outs, these big ones that glide out, and it's almost as if they're kind of specialty suited just for this. I'm not saying they don't work on other things, and you could, but like you put this on a glide bait, well, the inherent hit physics of a glide bait are so sensitive to anything being resistant on the body itself. There's no bill, there's no anything like that. It's just you're turning the bait side to side. You give it energy and it swings out, and then when you give it energy the next time, well, now it's pulling against that surface, so, oh, it turns this way. So you put something on the back end of it, and a lot of times it's going to fight that motion. It's going to kill that energy. But you put them on the back of these types of crankbaits, and not just the, you know, like I said, I think this is better than the Triple D, but that's another good example that everybody's aware of. It's like a Triple D crankbait. It has that design to it. It's meant to be fished more like this, especially the big one. A tail like that would be excellent on a bait like that because it doesn't have that inherent wagging action that you're fighting with the tail. The tail is just kind of following along with the arc of the bait as it goes. It actually helps give it a little bit more control, which is a good thing because these baits really can't get out from under you. I know I've said that like 3 times, but like you really have to almost feel when you're fishing down deep. You'll feel it kind of twist and roll, and you almost feel those hooks hit the leader where it's like, oh, you feel that, and you're like, oh, watch it. I don't usually stick to a single brand when I'm doing a bait feature because, I mean, I don't think you can find all the answers with a single line of baits. And that's never, of course, the case, but H-Twill tackle comes pretty damn close. And so that's what's kind of neat. If you can kind of see on the deck, that's just an assortment of some of the baits from the hard bait, crankbait stuff that he makes. But the thing that's most intriguing to me about his line of baits is they're all pretty much uniquely made to do different things. Most of them have some kind of a weight insert. This is one of the rare ones that doesn't. Don't know if it needs it though. And I mean, you can look at the shape of that crankbait. It's called a Cranky X. It's a pretty unique design. It doesn't look that different when you look at it from this angle. You point it at you, see this? It's wider on the end. It's got that short little rounded lip. And it's a really great little twitch bait. Really unique twitch bait too. Like I have to admit, I don't think I've ever seen one with quite that build to it. You can tell when the lip makes it turn, the back end catches and it twists it around. So when you're twitching it like that, that's what gives it that janky action. It's also one heck of a trolling crankbait too. I was floored at how deep this thing went on a short amount of line. But I mean, this is a bait you can twitch it hard. It's got that slow rise, and that's cool. Like when you have a bait that's default, you can't adapt the weight to it. It's really good to have it kind of start as a slow rise. I'm not the biggest fan of crankbaits that are default sinking or default neutrality, super neutral, because a lot of times the water gets cold, some of the factors change, it'll turn to a sinking crankbait. And really for having multi-purpose function, like being able to troll it, this is about perfect. Because to have a trolling crankbait, you really want it to be buoyant to some extent. You want it to constantly have that resistance to work against. And that's a good little balance. As far as just a plug and play crankbait, it's got a nice little erratic action. You can fish it slow, you can twitch the crap out of it. But that's where we'll move on, because that's one of his few baits that doesn't have weight inserts integrated into the design. Still pretty dope. Let's talk about some of these. I think we were talking earlier, I was mentioning one of his other models, the larger switchback. And I've got some smaller ones here too, but I was going to use that as a demonstration just to refresh your memory. We were talking about how Those are basically the two same body designs. Like that's, I mean, yep, basically the same body design right there. But the difference between the lip juxtaposed to the angle of the body, going off 30 degrees, as opposed to the lip going with the curvature of the body. See what I mean? It's two different animals. So let me show you. And most people, you know, I could be guilty of it too. I've done it where like, you just look at it and be like, oh, that looks the same. They're really not. So this is the 7-inch Cranky Nitro, which I said is the exact same body design as the switchback. It's just the lip placement makes a huge difference, and then the weighting accordingly makes a big difference in the way you can present it. So this is a floating crank initially. It's a really good little twitch bait. Then I put the weight in it, and you can almost make it perfectly suspend. I mean, look, if you want to get crazy with it, like if that's pretty darn close to neutral buoyancy. It's still doing a little bit of a slow rise. It's got a slow pause. But I mean, if I wanted to get crazy with it, okay, I've got this, I think it's like a 3/4 of an ounce. I've got this weight right here, and I can plug this in. Now, I've got a slow sink. Very slow sink. I can fish it deeper. It still twitches out. You can sink it down, make it roll. And that's the cool thing. It's a shallow twitch. It's a shallow lip. Shallow running crankbait if it just went on its own depth curve or dive curve. But then you can take the action of that short lip and you can sink it down and rip it up a little bit. And that's the cool thing about Roger's designs. We're going to go through some more of them too, but like the fact that I can do that with the same bait. Then just for example, I'll just show you the default. So this is it without anything. Super buoyant. Super buoyant. Couldn't even twitch it that hard. Runs well. You control it. It's got a good little running depth. And it's a good little twitch bait. If you just want to be aggressive, you can throw it. A lot of times you're fishing something really aggressive, you want it to kind of rise back up because it gives you somewhere to start back. Every time you hit it and you give it a little bit of a pause, that backup motion of it when it floats back. But that's just one of the cool things about the way he designed his baits, is even off the default mode, he considers the weighting options of every one of them, what it does differently. So let's talk about another one. One we're just looking at. Now this is the same body design, but that's the switchback. Like I said, the bait, the bill curves with the curvature of the bait. So just for study, I'll take the weight out first. This one seems to be a little bit more sensitive to weight too. So same body design. So it doesn't have that really, like if I just pull it straight, it doesn't do that hard head kicking action. It's more of kind of like a roll. So then when you twitch it, it wants to roll out more. It's not engaging that resistance against the body and making the whole body wag. It's literally the bill is integrated into the curve of the bait. So it just extends that foil and it makes it kind of want to roll out, dive, jank around. You can kind of see it's a little bit of a slow rise at first. You can get really micromanagement with it. It's a 1/4 ounce weight. And he puts these two, he has somewhere he has like the mid weight, one in the front. So the front one's going to point it head down a little bit. Now it's still a very slow sink, or a slow float. So now I can fish it like that. So it slows down the ascent quite a bit. In that little bitty weight. So now I can take it out, pause it. I know when I let it sit and pause for a minute, it's not going to get out of position. Not as fast anyway. So I can take my time with letting it kind of swing in, swing out. And like every time I pause 4 or 5 seconds, if you have a really buoyant bait, it's going to rise 4 or 5 feet. With this, I literally took a bait that might come back to the surface on its own accord if I didn't plug that weight in while I was letting it pause. But instead, it keeps it down. Let's take it a step further. And that's the cool thing about these, is like having a body design that's integrated with the weight systems like this as intelligently as he does really lets you kind of tweak your presentation. Even though you've got like one bait, you can do multiple things with it. Like we've demonstrated, you can troll them, especially if they're floating or just fishing fast. Here we just added that other weight, so it made it a little bit slower rise. Now here, look, that's super slow rise. That's perfect. That's perfect suspension. See that? So now that goes from being like, well, let's say you wanted to fish it super shallow. You just leave the weight out. Or you want to troll it, leave the weight out. Say you want to fish it a little bit deeper, but you got some weeds or something, so you want it to have that backup factor. You're fishing through trees. Well, then you put that second weight in, put the smaller weight in. Let's say you just want to hang time the living shit out of this thing, and if you let it sit there, you could go eat a sandwich and come back, and it would still be sitting close. That's not too far off. Probably any more, and I might make it sink, but that's about as much suspension as you could ever want in a crankbait, especially being able to switch it out on the fly. So, like I said, that's the switchback, and it's cool because I got to show you both body design. Well, I mean, both of those baits, same body design, the way you can integrate the weights and make them do their own little version of what I just showed you, where you go between what's the application of it when I just have it on the default floating, what do I do when I put this weight in, what do I do with that weight, when I put this weight in, a heavier one, lighter one, and there's so many different things you can do with them, and it's in a single bait. And most of all of his baits are like that, and the ones that aren't, he's probably already considered that it was either redundant, moot, or it would have been more trouble to the design of the bait than it was worth trying, worth integrating. So yeah, I mean, I've got this bait and I worked it down. It was just a little short cast. And it sits there and it hangs. And I mean, I'll be honest, I've used a lot of suspending crankbaits for muskie. And the funniest thing is too, you know, through the years, baits that are popular baits, like the 10-inch Jake, stuff like that, they don't make a suspending model and they don't have this kind of thing integrated to it. That's a great bait. I'm not knocking that bait. But it just amazed me that like H2O Tackle Roger, I mean, he already took the liberty of designing all these baits to have the weight placements on them, because otherwise I know guys that have this, it's cool that they do it, but they have it down to an art of like how to weight a Jake. Like you have to put this amount of lead around the hooks, or one guy like has to drill holes into the body and you have to tap the certain cavities and put this much water in. Or you could screw in a damn weight and then take it out in 15 seconds if you don't like it. I mean, that's what I've never understood. Well, let's take another look at that body design. And that's kind of what's cool about Roger. Every time I see something, I'm like, oh, I might not understand why he did it for a reason, but I know he did it. So this is the same body design again, but this is the diver. I'll take the weight out just so we can show the base model. So here, check it. Like we'll use this as the example because I think, yeah, there you go. Those two, exact same bait. You notice how the lift's beveled up a little bit? I can almost tell you that's because if it was at that arc all the way down, you had that length to it, it would make it want to track. It would be too much for it. But you put that little bit of a bevel to it, and it's going to get a lot of the same diving depth, but it's not going to make this uncontrollable. It's going to let it fish a little bit faster. It's going to be able to handle that kind of big bill on the front and the resistance. So let me show you. That's the diver. So default. And it's a deep diving crankbait. And as I said before, because of the angle of the lip out from the body, it's not lined up with it. It doesn't follow the curve. It's like juxtaposed to it, so there's like the 30-degree angle down. That's going to give it that head wag action. And that's the deep model, so it's going to get down a little bit more. But as you can see, it'll get down really deep really quick. You can twitch it. It's not a super fast rise, but hey, look at this. Let's say I want to get it down there and then I want it to stay the hell down. Stay on a cast. Maybe I put too much. Nope, perfect. So now I've got a bait. Super slow rise. So I can take that deep crankbait. Watch. And take it. Reel it straight down a little bit. And I'll just start doing this. Let it set. And like I said, when I do that and I put the weight in, I know, even though it's got that slow rise, I know it's not going to get into trouble. It's super neutrally buoyant. With just a little bit of a favor to buoyancy. And I can let it sit there and I know it's not out of position. The other cool thing when you can do it, just do that super slow rise, is the next time you twitch it with a crankbait, you're twitching and it's going down. So let's say you hit the bottom, right? Well, if you've got one that's super neutrally buoyant or it's a slow sink, once you get it down, it's just going to dig more into the bottom because the inherent motion of it when you work it is going to go down. So if you've got it to where it's weighted perfectly to where it just super slow rises like this, then especially with a deep diving crankbait where it's going to be digging that much deeper instead of like swinging out or just doing a little bit of a head turn or a side swipe, it's going to actually be digging down when you twitch it. That means you're not going to be constantly hung up on the bottom. You're not going to be like digging into the bottom. You can hit the bottom and then let go, but it's still slow enough that it's working as a suspension. Make one more cast with that. I got a feeling. You notice too with some of these baits, especially the ones that have the angled lip, not the one that's kind of into the curve of the bait, I'm not really hitting them too hard. Almost about the moment I feel the, yep, and there's the bottom. Okay, look, there's a good example. I'm hitting the bottom with the crankbait. And I let it readjust itself. And I hit the bottom again. But every time I pause it, it's not going down to the bottom. It's super slow rising. So I can twitch it. Work it down. Being able to have that pause without losing your ground that you've gained with depth on the cast is a really useful thing, and it's especially useful when you can do it with a crankbait that you can change it out on the fly. Because if you can do that, you can also get really modular with this weighting stuff. And that's the coolest thing, because basically what I've shown you with these baits is you can almost essentially have 3 or 4 baits in one, if not more. Because most things you buy, there's a sinking version, a suspending version, a floating version, and it's like, well, or you can do that. That's pretty smart. I'll show you the other one. It's pretty neat, and this is kind of a prototype. This is the, well, basically the bigger version of the Cranky Nitro. So that's an 8-inch version. It's a little bit bigger profile, not a big deal. It has a little bit more swag. Wait out. So I'll show you the default here. So let's tune that just a bit. So, as before, default, really high buoyancy diver, and look at that. It's got like a really nice rollout action to it. It's a good little twitch bait. Excellent trolling bait, shallow water. Look at that, when you do that, even with it buoyant, it sure janks out. What happens when you start playing around with it? Now see, this one's so buoyant, it's hard to tell because it's such a buoyant bait and it's so much bigger. it's not going to respond to the weights as much. Now you can see once you get it down on a cast, you get to notice a little bit more. It stays down. It's not rising up as fast. But let me see, because we can go heavier. And that's the neatest thing about that, man. I know I'm all giddy here, but that's just neat to me. Like, be able to have the same bait, and all you have to do is take about 10 seconds, screw a new weight in, and now it's still floating. I put that super heavy weight in it. Look at that. Now it's all about hang time. Look at that with that weight in the middle line like that. Makes it roll out. I mean, you literally just turned a summertime bait into a wintertime bait. I mean, it's not that static, because I mean, I catch a lot of stuff going slow during all the periods of the summer when they're inactive. But I mean, especially right now, it's like just taking a bait that I have to twitch fast or troll or straight crank, or it's just basically a surface bait. And I've turned it into a bait that I can fish it painstakingly slow. Give it a twitch, let it sit. Give it a twitch, let it sit. You can watch it come in. With that weight in too, look at that. It even like flashes out to the side. Let's even try something else. Watch this. You'll notice I'm not concerning myself with getting off the next cast. I think that's what a lot of people make the mistake of with muskie fishing. They're so concerned with just getting to the next cast that they don't take their time with the one they're on. Slowly working it back, taking its time. Really cool. So that's a pretty damn good little line of crankbaits. It comes from the same guy, Roger Waters, H2O Tackle. Like I said, you kind of look at them in a lineup, and they all look the same, especially the Cranky Nitro and the Switchback, but they're two different animals altogether. Hey guys, so we've been talking a lot about Roger Waters baits, H2O Tackle. But he's a genius. But this is kind of the pull bait category. We've been talking about all the crankbaits and stuff. And this is interesting. This is called a Warthog ST. Now, there's a Warthog and there's a Hammerhead. Can't show the Hammerhead there, but Hammerhead's basically a giant version of this. So it kind of looks stupid. I thought so too. It is anything but. This is a very, very intelligent design. Well, let me show you why. Check this out. So it's, once again, ironically, it's almost literally the same body design as the Cranky Nitro and the Switchback. I know, right? Like, does that look familiar at all? But literally, what's the difference between these three baits? The shape and placement of the lip. So there's the Cranky Nitro. It's a crankbait. This is the Switchback. Same body design. The lip comes in more at an angle, in, like, basically in the curve of the bait. So you can kind of draw the line. And then he took the same body design and he put a big square bill in the front. So, I mean, if you just looked at it, you'd be like, well, it's a crankbait. Well, no, it's not. Watch this. This is a very, very unique bait. This is the default. no weight in it. And you can see every time I pull it, it goes to the other side. It's got that neat little tail on it. And that's the cool thing, actually. I just traded the tails out because the tail placement on these Warthog STs, which are really neat baits, it's a screw. It's a screw with a little center pin, so you can literally unscrew and try different soft plastics on it. I like the curly tails because they don't fight against the smooth pulling action as opposed to like a paddle tail. But these soft curly grubs like this, and especially, I'll tell you this, my experience, sometimes they'll use the little small ones, like the little Gumbo Grubs. I like to use bigger ones on these, and I'll trade them out. Something with a little bit more of a rudder, a little bit more of a base. A lot of the ones they come with, they're kind of small, which is fine. But I've noticed a lot of times if I put like a bigger tail on it, like these, and that one got chewed up the other day, so trade it out. It gives a little bit more directive whenever it's turning. It can almost get out from under you like some of the other baits. When you put that bigger tail on it, it still has that jankiness, but it gives it a little bit more control. And here's where things get fun. Once again, like almost 90% of his baits, it's got weight placements. And this is cool in the fact that, like the bigger switchback, it's got one on the head, one in the middle. Start with the head. So, as you can imagine, when you screw the weight in here, now you're pointing it down head first. And it's a slow rise, very slow rise, perfect. But because you're putting the head weight down like that, it's not going to swing out as much. It's going to dive deeper, but it's not going to swing out quite as much. Part of the reason I put that bright tail on there too, so you guys could see it. Now it's a pull bait with a really nice suspending action, but it doesn't swing out too far to the side. It just kind of pulls down. Sometimes you want that. What if you don't want that? What if you want to be able to get down a little bit more, not have to worry about it rising up all the time super fast, but you still want to do the swing? But I just showed you. Check this out. Take the weight, move from the front of the head, put on the midline. Now, that weight in the front's not pulling this thing down like this, so it's just getting the surface area of the head pointing down, making it dive. Now, it's sitting more at an angle. So not only is the angle of the bait changed to this when it suspends, it's not just pulling it down. When you pull it, it's got more of the surface area it's catching too, so that will make it do this. A lot more like it is default. See how it's swinging out side to side more? I mean, it goes pretty good side to side. You don't want to hit it too hard. You can make it snap, but it's more of a pull. It's not a twitch. So now I can take this, pull it, pause it, and now instead of just going down, it's going down. And every time it's going down, it's searching out side to side, and then it hangs. Which, I'm be honest, I've not seen a bait ever do that like this, ever. And this fairly old design, not super old, but you can see that thing just came in. So that really, I mean, a lot of people will be like, well, that's just lazy. I'm like, no, to me, that's genius. That's someone that took a very effective baseline body design, obviously not the only one that he has, and he realized, you know, if I change the weight placement and I change where I put the foil, put the blade, or put the lip, I can have literally 3 different baits in one. That's pretty neat. That's a smart guy. I'll tell you what, he's got a couple other things that kind of fall outside that spectrum. Just unique little things. This is one of them. And that is called a ripper. Now this is a pull bait. No weight placements, just as is. And it looks stupid, it really does. I mean, but if we're being honest with ourselves, most of the stuff we throw does anyway. Now this bait, slow hang, slow rise. But as you can see, it's got a lot of the same characteristics of another crankbait we just looked at, where it gives it that sharp turn in the back end, like that. It's not the exact same body style, but you notice how it gets wider as it goes to the base. It's narrower. It's that physics translated into a pull bait. So that makes it want to turn jank, weave, and you can fish it pretty slow too. So if I want to get erratic, I can do this. I can work it down. If I just want to fish it slow, I can tap it. You'll just kind of turn its head, stop. It's very rare you find a single bait designer manufacturer that gives you such an eclectic palette of baits. He's very, very underutilized, very unappreciated. And I mean, he's one of the few guys you ever meet that like I've never seen him make something that he's just making it because, oh, that's a popular thing now. That's what people are using. It's like, I don't think he's ever been a mainstream name. I'd like to see him become one, but I mean, the only bait that he really seems to have really broken into mainstream is the Barbarian. We've talked about those, but it's because it's so unique. But even then, the Barbarian is not what it seems. It looks like a giant rattle trap. Only in appearance would you fish it like a giant rattle trap. The least I ever fish it is like a giant rattle trap where I just throw it out and reel it in. But it's really interesting to see that a single lure maker makes everything from twitch baits to top wires. We're going to discuss some really cool ones. Glide baits, pull baits, and especially once he starts to explore like different weighting options. And like I showed you, the same body design, he did 3 different things with the lip and the weighting. And you can literally come up with at least 15 different 20 presentations off of just a handful of baits on the bottom of the boat. That's what makes a really good lure manufacturer. That's what makes a really good bait. And those are the kind of tools you should integrate in your arsenal. Instead of looking for these things, well, this guy says to throw this guy says to throw that. Yeah, I get that I'm not telling you what to throw, but I'm offering you an insight into why I throw things that I throw. But I like to feel like I justify it too. I just literally showed you 5 times the presentations capable of this pile of baits if it was just singular baits. Like being able to change the weighting out, being able to do all these things. I was literally taking single baits and showing you 2, 3, 4, 5 different things you can do with the same bait for different applications. That's astounding. That's really good. And that's why I think that you should really consider looking into this stuff, because I've never seen a line of baits like that I could have so many multiplications of presentations with just a fistful of stuff. And just all I have to do is switch out the weight, and I can go from fishing anywhere to shallow weed beds to, sometimes down to 15, 20 feet. Hope you guys like that. My name's Cory Allen. We'll be back with some more of his stuff. It's pretty cool.